Hey guys, my name's Daniel Hourigan, and I probably know most of the people that are tuning in, but feel free to say hi. I'm going to be starting this VFX production live stream every week. I know quite a few people have been asking about it for a while, so I finally have time to do it, which is going to be nice and fun. So yeah, feel free to say hi, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to be working on a shot today, and probably for the next couple of streams I'm going to be working on this one shot, which is a cool King Kong shot, which we're doing for the school. So it's going to incorporate a whole bunch of effects, which is nice, and it's kind of what you tend to get in a VFX shot is, it's not just one thing usually, there's a whole bunch of things that goes into it. So we'll be tackling a whole lot of different scenarios with this one shot, so I think it'll be a good kind of topic to talk about. But if you have other questions as I'm working, I'm going to primarily be in Houdini, but I will be going into Nuke at some point, once I have renders to comp it. So that will be good as well. Hopefully that's interesting for other people as well. But yeah, say hi, and I'm going to jump in. So here's the shot that I'm going to be working on, and it's this kind of King Kong inspired shot, which we have this animation for already. If I turn off the assets, you can see that we already have this really cool render. Hey, Drawn Skull. Let me know your name as well, if I know you, because I don't know you from your call sign. I teach Houdini FX, so I'm the head of the Houdini FX department at CGS Spectrum. So I teach Houdini VFX. Just a bit about me. I've been working in the VFX industry for about 15 years, predominantly in film, but I started working in sort of games, cutscenes, and more pre-rendered stuff, which was a good intro, into working in 3D. I got to learn a whole lot of different skills, and this shot is a full CG shot, so this similar sort of stuff that we would be working on in games cutscenes, where we're working on a full CG shot. Although in film these days as well, sometimes we do work on full CG shots like this. Hey, big glob of goo, how you going? Welcome. Hey, Nadia. Let me know if my audio is okay as well. I think it's okay, but I can turn it up if it's a little bit quiet. Cool. Nice. So you wanna work in film, Drawn Skull? Do you want to work in VFX or as an effects artist, or which part are you kind of interested in with film production? Sorry, I'm drinking my coffee as well. It's early in the morning here. Trying to pep myself up. Slight echo. Okay, interesting. I'm not sure what would cause that. Maybe it's just my room. I can turn down my microphone slightly, maybe that. Or maybe move my mic around. Let me just check. I'll see if it gets any better. Stream open another tab. Maybe. I'm not sure. Let me know if it improves. It could just be my room echoing. I don't know. Hey, Patrick. Oh, okay, cool. Sounds better now. Great. I just moved the mic away from my voice, from my mouth. Hey, Patrick. Welcome. Thanks for that. About the audio. So as I was saying, in VFX these days as well, because 3D has come such a long way, it's not unusual to have a full CG shot like this, even with the character. Sometimes what you might have is a projection of a real actress or something. In this case, it's an actress. You might have a projection of her but still she's a digital character just with textures projected, or maybe a still from a plate projected on. So this is a really, it's a really good kind of scenario for us to test out a whole lot of different effects with. What I'm kind of thinking, so if I turn the assets back on, what I'm kind of thinking that we're going to do here is, obviously we've got these torches, which, you can see that some light has been indicated there, so that is meant to be fire. So we're going to do some fire on there. I'm probably not going to start with that though. I'm going to start with something a little bit more fun, hopefully. So we've got this scream effect. And I was thinking that, some drool and breath effects would be really cool for that. So that's probably what I'm going to start with, is maybe the drool. And we'll see how far we can get with that. And then you can see that, hey, Rizwanimation, how's it going? Sorry, I pronounced that terribly. John Skulls says, well, I'm interested in directing, writing, producing, and I was looking at CG Spectrum courses, interested in doing some VFX work. Well, yeah, I think, if you're interested in film production, even if you're not necessarily interested in being a VFX artist, I think at least learning, what's involved is really, makes you a much better film producer, director, writer, because you know how to make, you know how to write, you know how to direct for VFX. Whereas, directors that don't have any idea, or supervisors that don't have any idea about what's involved in the VFX industry, tend to make choices that can really affect the production of a film. So you definitely know when you're working on a film as a VFX artist if the director or supervisor has actually any VFX experience, because the choices that they make and the things that they have shot on set, they're not really thinking about the end goal or how we're going to use that as a VFX artist. And quite often, we have to redo things or replace things that they've done. So I think having knowledge about the industry and how things work, even if you're not going to be a VFX artist, is a great thing. It's a great thing to learn. Hey Nguyen, how do you put your image in the viewport like that? Do you mean my camera? I'm using OBS Studio, and it's a scene that I've created that is doing the overlay. It's not a Houdini trick that you can do, unfortunately. But yeah, if you're interested in doing that stuff for streaming, you can check out OBS Studio. Oh, hey Rizwan, how you going? Hey Hamid, welcome. Nice to see you all here. So I was talking about the breath effects and the drool stuff. I think for the drool, I'm probably going to do some vellum sims, maybe some pyro breath effects, maybe some particles as well. And then I thought, just to sell, hey, no worries, Ian. To sell the sort of force of the breath, you can see, so I don't have the character in here, you can see that the character is just on the background plate of the camera. But you can see on the character's dress that there's some wind has been simulated. And I was thinking to sell that on our environment, so working with the things that we do have, we have this foreground and we have the monkey, King Kong. So I was thinking to sell that breath effect, that wind, we could simulate it on the fire, so have the fire kind of be affected by some forces, but also on the ground we could have some leaves and dirt be blown by that as well, just to really sell that effect. And that's, it's quite often what you do when you're an effects artist. Wind is something that's very hard to, it's hard to visualize, it's hard to see, it's often invisible. So adding things in, like leaves or dust that get blown around, can really sell the force of that effect of him, kind of screaming and yelling. And the same thing when we come to do the drool, maybe we'll get the drool kind of kicking out with that force. So Drawn Skull says, I just don't know which course to choose from, but I can tell what I want to learn in course, and maybe you can help me choose. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you, talk to you more about that when you're ready as well. I think, look, sometimes comp is a good thing to get into if you want to get into film production, but you don't want to get like super deep into the VFX world. Comp can be a good thing because you're sort of dealing with the footage aspect of it, and you can do that without VFX as well. You can do that without Houdini. You can just bring plates together, edit them, or make simple color correction changes to affect the story or things like that. So comp and nuke is a great entry point into film as well. Doesn't have to be effects, but I'll be talking about nuke across the course or across the stream. Probably not today because I'm just creating the elements to begin with. But when I get to rendering them, then I'll be taking them into nuke, and we can talk about that. I can give you a bit of a run through of that as well. Rizwan, did I build that 3D model? No, I did not. So these models were provided to me. I'm not sure who built the model, but Nick, one of our founders of CG Spectrum, actually animated this. So I'm pretty sure he did. So he's done a great job on that. He previously was an animator at Weta, among other places. So he's done a really nice job of that, and that is looking really nice in the render. If you have a look at the plate, this is the render that he has done, which is looking awesome. So yeah, I didn't. And, this is exactly kind of how a film VFX shot would work. We would be provided the assets as an effects artist, which I am. I would never model the environment or the character. Yeah, it does look like Kong. Looks very similar, which is great because that's what we're trying to do. It's a homage to King Kong movie. So Patrick says, did you plate inside the camera? Let me talk about the assets and the camera and the setup of the scene. So in a film production, as an effects artist, I inherit all these assets. They all get published and I just load them into my scene. So I would never be responsible for creating a character or an environment. I would only be responsible for adding extra elements to the scene. So the things that I was talking about, the drool, the fire, the wind, the leaves, maybe some mist, things like that, environmental things like atmospherics, but not the actual creation of the environment. I would maybe be responsible for destroying the environment, and then occasionally I might have to create my own geometry, like I'd probably have to create the leaves if I want to put them in there. But yeah, this is exactly how it would work in a VFX studio as well, where I get the environment and the character, and then I start applying my effects to that. So would I do the lighting? It depends. So it depends if I have any atmospherics that I've created, then it's possible that I would do the lighting for that. But if it's more sort of tied to the environment, which this one I would say is at the moment, then that would probably go through lighting. It all depends on the studio and how they work. For instance, at Method, Melbourne, where I usually work, I spent most of my time, the effects department does render a lot of their own assets, but I think because it's so closely tied to a character, and also the character's rendered in Maya, whereas we're going to be rendering our effects in Houdini, any sort of lighting interaction with the character is probably want to be handled, where that character has been set up. So in hair and fur. Oh, Hamid says I have an echo in my voice still. I will try moving my mic again and see if it helps. I don't know what. I'm not sure what. Let me just check my audio and see. One second. Let me see. Well, let me know if the echo goes away, Hamid. So yeah, it really depends on the studio. A lot of big studios, the lighting department will render all of the effects elements. But smaller studios, or maybe studios that have bigger Houdini pipelines or something, the effects artists might be responsible. I know at Animal Logic, I think in Sydney, The effects artists don't really render a lot of their stuff. It just goes straight to lighting. That's yeah. I don't know what I'm not sure what the echo is. Sorry, Howard. I'm not sure how to figure it out apart from moving my microphone. We'll try a different position. Hidden video that might have its audio enabled. If using Twitch Stream Manager dashboard. I'm using Restream, Adam. I don't know if... maybe... let me close that. See if that helps. Let me know. Let me know if it goes away. Okay, so... Patrick asked about the plate in the camera. So... Here's the camera. It was brought in through Fbx. So all of this stuff has been created in Maya, right? Most of the assets came in as Alembic. So you can see the Kong asset is an Alembic. And the foreground is also an Alembic. Use Lightwave, Rizwan. I haven't used Lightwave. I mean, I've heard that it's pretty good for modeling. For effects, I don't think... I don't know if there's any effects in there. Is there? I used to use 3D Studio Max, which was also quite good for modeling. But yeah, Lightwave. I don't know. I mean, you know, I tend to follow the industry because it affects whether I can get work or not. So I use whatever is the sort of industry standard. Certainly for effects, because they're the jobs that I go for. So Houdini is definitely an industry standard for effects. Lightwave, yeah, I've heard people do stuff in Lightwave, certainly for modeling, but I haven't really heard of anyone doing effects in it. But let me know if you can. I'd be curious to know. So the camera is brought in as an FBX. We tried it as an Alembic, but for some reason it just didn't quite work out. There may have been some issues on the export end. Quite often working between Maya and Houdini, you run into a lot of problems. Certainly when exporting from Houdini to Maya, that's typically when the major problems occur, but you can get problems trying to bring stuff in from Maya as well. So we ended up going with a Fbx camera, and that just brings in basically a Houdini camera with baked transforms. You can see all these keyframes here, and that works. So you know, I'm not gonna argue with that or pursue it to get the Alembic working. If this works, that's fine. And the background image here is loaded in there, Patrick. So that that's what the plate is. So that's if I turn off this button here, the I don't know what's called, show display background. That will hide that. Now on the assets, I've also added a UV texture node. So I've got my facet and my UV texture, and that is doing a projection from the camera, like that. So that's pointing to the camera 1 FBX / camera 1, so it's pointing to the node inside. It can't go off the subnetwork. In fact, I could extract that camera from here, but that's okay. So UV texture is set to perspective from camera, and that gives me a UV texture that kind of looks a bit weird, but it's based on the camera position, so that's fine. The only purpose of it is to get that plate projected on. So when I do that, UV quick shade, turn on materials to make sure that it displays. Then I get this, you know, it looks pretty weird from the side, but from the angle of the camera, it looks fine. And you can see when I go through, yeah, then I get the textures projected. And you can see as soon as I rotate off the camera axis, I get like the tooth at the back of the mouth. But from the perspective of the camera, it is fine, and that's great, you know, and that just helps me visualize this stuff a little better, and it might also help for reflections, refractions, lighting, all those sort of things. So it's always a good step to have that on there. it also allows me to check. I mean, one of the main reasons I did that was just to make sure that my model was actually lining up to the camera that this was rendered from in Maya. So, you know, if I project the Maya render back on and it lines up, then I know that, you know, everything's okay. So on the foreground, I've done the same thing. So it's an alembic. I've unpacked these alembics. Is compositing like creating the worlds or adding characters in the shot? Compositing is actually taking elements and bring them all together. It's kind of like Photoshop. So you would have a plate, a shot plate, like a video that the director and the cinematographer and whoever else would have shot on set. So that's what you start with, and then you take all the elements. Sometimes there's no elements, and you're just color correcting and adjusting some things, maybe painting out a few things that shouldn't be there. But if it's a CGS shot or a VFX shot with explosions and stuff like that, then you're getting all that stuff and bringing it together and layering it up. So, you start with the plate, which might have no building in it. Then you take the digital building, you put that on there as a layer. And then you take your explosion, you put that on there as a layer. And that's what compositing is. Rizwan says, yes, there are effects in Lightwave. I'll have to look at it, Rizwan. I don't have any experience with Lightwave. I would definitely suggest, if you are interested in effects, then Houdini is the gold standard. But by all means play around with them in other packages. I mean, you can do stuff in Maya, you can do stuff in Blender. There's lots of options, but Houdini is definitely, in my opinion, in the industry's opinion, the best and most flexible tool for creating effects. All right, so we've had a good look, at the scene and talked about projections. So I'm going to start creating an effect, and feel free to keep asking questions if you want to. I'm going to start by creating a new geometry container, and I'm going to call this draw. Oops. It's always good to, when you start a new effect, start it in a new container, rather than, you can see here, I should probably call this foreground asset. So I'm trying to keep it nice and tidy and keep things named, similarly. So the Kong asset is just going to be that, and then I'm going to bring that in. I'm actually going to create a null here, and I'm going to say out Kong, and I'll just check that as well. When I middle click on this node, it pops up on my other screen. So I'm just going to do this, and I want to make sure that it's unpacked. So right up the top here, I've chosen this load as Houdini geometry. But another thing you can do is just leave it as default, which is alembic delayed load primitives. If you middle click on there, you can see it brings in 7 packed alembics. And I can't access their points primitives, so I can't go in and, select his tooth. You can see when I try to do that, it selects like the whole mouth, all the teeth, the jaw, I guess. You can see the tongue is a separate object. That can be useful sometimes for isolating whole collections of geometry, but what I want to do is unpack that. You can see when I do that, it opens up a little more, so it's got points. It says 7 primitives, 71,000 vertices, and 7 polysoups. So another thing we need to put down to get rid of those polysoups is the convert node. So put that down, and now you can see I've got the full information. So the polygons, verts, primitives, points. I've lost maybe the path attribute. It's gone. So I can put that on here, transfer attributes on the unpack if I need that. It's not really necessary to have that one probably, but it's always good to retain information that comes in from your imported geometry. Then I'm calculating normals, so I have point normals, because you can see, because this came from Maya, it comes in with vertex normals, because points don't exist in Maya, but they do in Houdini. So I need point normals if I want to do any kind of displacement or things like that, or any other kind of effects using normals. I want to convert them over to point normals. So you can see now I've got these little point normals. And they might be useful, they might not be. We'll just see. And there's my texture projection as well. Alright, so let's get into the draw. I'm going to put down an object merge. If you're getting smooth normals on a hard surface, you probably want to try doing vertex normals instead of point normals. Point normals tend to, because there's only one per, per junction of polygons, they do tend to smooth things across. But if you instead use a normal node set to vertex normals, because the way vertex normals work is that instead of being one at the junction, there are actually four, one for each polygon that connects there. You can cusp those normals to create a nice hard edge. So you can see as I take that cusp angle down, I can actually get nice, that's okay, you're welcome. I can get nice hard edges. So quite often that's what I'll do. If I want like a very perfect flat face, I'll put down a vertex normal instead of a point normal. Because that, yeah, definitely does. You can see even when I put that down, it does change my normal, the way that these normals are being calculated. But that's okay, because I'm not actually rendering this guy. I'm just going to use him to create the effects. But there you go. Okay, so let's go to our draw. I'm going to bring in the Kong object. So I'm going to go object merge, object 1, and Kong asset out Kong. There we go. And here he is in here. Now for the draw, I just probably want, the mouth. So I'm going to double click, holding shift and double clicking on the teeth, and then I'll grab the tongue as well. For starters, let me isolate those. See, my projection's all weird now. So there's the mouth isolated. And that's giving me a blast, and then I'm going to go back and maybe. So if I double click the whole thing, it selects all of his body. But what I'm going to do is just make a selection in here, whoops, like that, and then I'm hitting Shift G to expand that selection so I get kind of a decent capture of his mouth, like that. So I'm going to hit that delete as well. Now I've got that, which might be useful for a collision or something. And then I've got this one over here, which is our teeth and tongue. And from here, I might also just isolate the tongue. So delete that. So that's the tongue. And if I copy this blast node and delete non-selected, then I've got the teeth as well. So I've got now tongue, teeth, and that kind of mouth cavity. I can always turn off the texture as well because it gets a bit distracting. So let's think about what we want to do. So we've got this animation, we can look at it just through the teeth, and you can see it's opening up like that, screaming, and then closing again. So what I'm thinking in my head is that I want to have these kind of stringy bits of drool, and maybe there's some like that are just hanging off. I don't really know, I'm just going to kind of make it up and see what happens, but that's kind of what I'm imagining in my head, is these stringy bits of connection between these teeth here, like that. So what we could do is right at the start, we could try and create some little connections between the teeth. And there's loads of ways of doing that, and I'm not sure which is going to be the best approach here, but I'm going to try doing a connect adjacent pieces first. It's a nice kind of quick and easy way of joining geometry together. So we don't actually have a name attribute here. I don't know if I get rid of that, whether that works. We might need to actually create a name here. So if I put an assemble down, because these bits of geometry are separate, go to the part where it's screaming, they're two separate bits of geometry. The assemble set to create name attribute should give me, see that name, 2 unique. So it's giving me 2 unique names. Then when I have a look at my connect adjacent pieces, I think actually the scale of this scene might actually need to come down, because this is currently giving me nothing. Cool. Well, Yeah, Drawn Skull says, I'm interested in doing CGI characters making fire, water, and disaster effects. Well, that would definitely be the role of an effects artist. Not so much the characters, that's... doing characters is kind of across multiple departments, so it depends which part of doing the character you want. If you want to do it all, that's okay, but in a film environment, you probably wouldn't do that, so you have different departments within film. So the modeling department would be responsible for doing the model of the character. Then it would go to rigging, and they would rig it so that it can be animated, so putting the skeleton inside and giving it all the controls to make the animation. And then there would be the animation department that would do the animation. And then you would have a groom department or a character effects department, which would be doing the hair. And then there would be lighting departments. So there are a lot of, and effects. So there are a lot of things that go into doing a full CGI character. It's not usually, excuse me, just one person. So yeah, it's just something to be aware of. Obviously, if you're doing your own projects, then you're probably doing everything, but in a film environment or in a studio environment, you would be doing a component of an entire character. Okay, so I was going to just have a look at the scale before we go and create our effects. And this is something I meant to do at the start, but I forgot, got carried away. You can see that here's our origin, 0, 0, and you can see 125 meters, 250 meters away from origin. So this scene is huge, and that is common when you bring things in from Maya. So I'm going to scale this down. I'm going to scale it down probably by 0.1, so make it a tenth of the scale. So I'm going to put a transform node down. And I don't want to do any transforms at the top level, because that can really mess with things when you get into simulations, and also when you're object merging between different nodes. It starts to get very messy if you have transforms at top level. So I always do transforms in transform nodes, because you can always turn them off as well. It's nice and easy to bypass them. So I'm going to put down a 0.1 in there. Let's have a look at that. So that gives me 0 to 20 there. That looks much better. So let's copy this. Put it on the Kong asset as well. You can see now, it's nice and small. Everything is still fine, although we do need to scale our camera as well. So with cameras, usually I'll just put a null down for a camera, and then scale that at the top level. That's probably the exception of doing top level object-based transforms, using a null, and then plug the object in. You can see that. Oh, that hasn't worked. Let's see. Maybe because this is not actually hooked up inside. So that was floating inside the subnet, so it wasn't actually getting this parent relationship. If I go back in here, hook that up, come out, there we go, fixed. So that's important. If you've got a subnet, you want to make sure that the thing is actually hooked up inside the subnet. Alright, so mostly effects with water, fire, and disasters is what I'm really interested in. Would you say that that would be too much if I'm already directing, producing, and writing? The only filmmaker I know who does about everything is Robert Rodriguez. Well, I guess yes, it is that's a lot of work to be doing that, but you know, I'm not going to discourage anyone from trying. I think, you know, to do it and to do it well, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. So if you're doing that on your own personal projects, then you know, I've known someone who worked on a short film for years, more than 10 years, I think 18 years or something it took him to complete his short film, which he did everything for. I can't remember the name of it now. If it comes back to me, I'll tell you what it is. It was a fully CG thing, and those take a lot longer as well. Yeah, it's a lot of work to do everything yourself. So, you know, by all means, give it a go. But in my experience, it's too much work to try and do everything. So you're better off, you know, figuring out which avenue is actually your passion. Maybe you are more interested in the directing, producing, and writing, or maybe you're more interested in the creating aspect. when you're working in in VFX and working on feature films, you're always realizing someone else's creative vision. So that's something that you need to kind of be okay with as well. And I think it's actually, even if you do want to create your own stuff and do everything, it is a really good idea to get some experience in the industry. So if you learn Houdini effects or something like that, or compositing, it's a good idea to go and get some industry experience and see how it's actually done, because you learn so much when you do that. There are a lot of things that you don't really understand until you go and work at a studio and see how they do things. So having that experience is really, really valuable. I know experience is not necessarily easy to come by, but it definitely opens your eyes to possibilities and sort of ways of working that you may not have considered. So this connect adjacent pieces isn't working very well for me. Oh, here we go. So I think that the reason it wasn't working at this frame here is because of the distance. So probably my search radius is still too small. But if I go all the way back to the start, I can see I've got a whole bunch of connections, and really it's too many. So let's have a look. So I've got max search points. I can take that down to create less connections. And I can take the search radius down a little bit, and you can see that that's also kind of changing the result that I'm getting. I might try and go to one of these frames where his mouth's open and see if I can get something happening here. Yeah, it just doesn't seem to be wanting to create anything for me there. I guess it's just beyond the search radius. Even if I put it at 100, doesn't seem to want to do it. And looking at this, it's not exactly kind of what I was after. It's a little bit too much everywhere. I could go in and individually delete those, but I think what I'll do is I'll just make some little pieces that that'll be kind of fine. So I'm going to just put a grid down. And this is another reason why it's good to work at a small scale, because if this thing was 250 meters over there, it's really hard to align things that you create to something that's so far away. It's not impossible, but it just makes things harder. So I always like to work as close to the origin as possible. So I've got this grid, and I'm just going to try and align it to my teeth. I'm just going to put it in there somewhere. I should probably start at frame 1. Otherwise I'll have to move this again. Sometimes it's really hard to align things in 3D. I could use a snap tool or something, but I don't really like using those. You have to make sure that you don't accidentally pick all axes at once when you're doing this, because it moves it like really far away through the camera. All right, so that's not too bad. Let's just line one of these up, and we'll start with one, and then we can go from there. Feel free to ask any questions about what I'm doing, or anything else as well. All right, so I'm gonna take the rows down. I think just make it a square to start with, because I can remesh this after the fact. And then I'm going to set up a simple. Yes, I mean, if John Skull says, would you say the Houdini course is the best to learn disaster effects? Well, I mean, yeah, if doing that sort of stuff is kind of what you want to do, then Houdini is the tool that you want to learn. We don't necessarily teach disaster effects exactly, but we teach all of the things that are necessary to do disaster effects. So rigid body destruction is a big part of that. pyro, smoke, fire, things like that, all major parts of disaster effects. And then water, so we teach small scale water, but we also teach oceans. And then basically disaster effects can kind of cover every facet of effects. So you want to learn a good cross section of all sorts of things, and that's kind of what we try to teach, is a little bit of everything in Houdini. Houdini is a very vast software, and there's a lot to learn. So we try to cover the main simulation types. And other ways of working in terms of manipulating geometry and working with Vex and things like that. So yeah, I think, it's definitely, I think if you're interested, but you're not really sure, then maybe trying the intro course that we have now is a really good thing to try, because we give you a bit of a taste of all that stuff: rigid body destruction, fluids, pyro, do an explosion, smoke sim. That stuff is, that course could be a good thing to take if you're interested, but you're not really sure about doing the full kind of thing. Yeah, look, it's a lot. If you want to try and do every facet of film production, it's a lot to kind of work with. So I think you do need to think about what it is exactly you want to do. But certainly if you want to be the one creating these disaster effects for your own movies, then you will need to learn how to do it. But yeah, look, the intro course is an interesting one to try out. I've tried to get a good cross-section of stuff in there that gives you a good taste of what it is to be an effects artist. So or just to work in Houdini. It's not all about effects. But yeah, could be interesting to have a look at. Alright, so I've got this grid, I've got my teeth. What I'm going to do now is put down a vellum configure cloth. So this is going to be a vellum sim. Type of movies I want to make is horror, sci-fi, and superheroes, working on my own scripts. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think if you're more interested in the idea of the movie and the writing and the scripts, then it's not necessarily the right idea to learn how to do the effects as well. But obviously it can be difficult to realize those things if you don't know how to do it. But you may want to find like-minded people that want to work on those things with you, and can do the effects, and maybe you can learn a bit as you go. But it's definitely a lot of work to do it all. And I have in the back of my head that guy that was working on his project for 18 years, and that sounds like a very long time. So I'm gonna put a remesh down here to give this some subdivisions. So 0.1, let's look at that in wireframe. 0.05. Doesn't actually need to be super high res, but something like that might be right. And then I've plugged in my teeth geometry in here into the collision geometry input. And the reason I've done that is because I want to use a vellum attached to geometry node. So I'm going to hook all these inputs up, and then you can see my teeth there. And I'm going to, I might create I don't know if I'll create a group. Let's have a look. We've got this max distance. So you can see, without that, I have all these points being displayed, these little blue circles. So all those points are currently constrained to the teeth geometry. So I want to turn on this max distance, and you can see as I tweak that, I get fewer of those. Looks like 0.005 might be the way to go. So you can see I've got some up here. They're quite hard to see because the collision geometry is also blue. But you can see I've got some up here and down here. But these ones in the middle are unconstrained. So I think that will work pretty well. Let's have a look at what this looks like in the sim. So I'm going to put down two nodes, two nulls. Put down null 1, null 2, and hook them up here. So I'm going to go out geo, and this one will be called our con. Short for constraint, but it's just easier to type in reference if you just keep it short. So out geo and out con. Makes them nice and easy to find. And then I'm going to put down a dot network. Now, with Vellum, you have a couple of options. You do actually have the Vellum solver as well, which is a SOP-based version of what I'm about to set up, which is fine for testing. But you know, if you dive inside here, you can see that this is actually a dot network with a whole bunch of stuff in there. And I like to control this stuff a little more. So I'm not going to use this, but it is fine to use that for testing. But because I'm doing this as a proper VFX shot, I want to be able to control it as much as possible. So I'm going to set this up from scratch. So I've got my .NET, and I'll call this Vellum sim. And then I'm going to put down a Vellum solver. Always need a solver, and then a Vellum object. So the Vellum object kind of contains the data. It's got some guide settings that we need. With all simulation types, you have a solver and an object. So, you know, you've got flip solver and flip object. You've got pyro solver and pyro. It's not called pyro object, it's called smoke object, just to be confusing. And then you have a pop solver and a pop object. So all kind of simulation networks look quite similar. They all have the solver and the object. And then a source. So we've got Vellum source. And we can bring that in, and that goes into the post-solve slot. Now on here, this has some initial data, which is going to bring in something that's plugged into it. So we're not plugging anything in, so this won't bring any stuff in, but you can actually bring things in through the Vellum object. We're not going to do that today. We're going to bring it in through the Vellum source. Here, I need to, in the SOP path, I'm going to path that to my geometry. So // takes me to within this context. And then if I do // again, you can see I get this list of things that are outside the simulation network. So out geo. And then I can just copy that and put it in the constraint path. You can see there's my geometry. I can say out_con. Alright, cool. So that's giving me my constraints. Now I'm going to bring in a static object and merge that underneath. Make sure my inputs are the right way around. At the moment, they're the wrong way around because my effector relationship here on the merge is left input affects right input. So I want the collision geometry to affect my cloth. So that would be the left input affecting the right. So I need to swap these around. And you can just select the merge and hit Shift R. There we go. So now, on static object, I need to create a null for my teeth geometry. So just going to do that here. Let's do it in line here. And then say out teeth geo. And use deforming geometry turned on. SOP path again, // there it is there, out teeth geo. And that's all fine. Collisions, it is going to use this collision stuff here. So if I turn that on and turn off display geometry, you can see that it actually doesn't look very good at all. You can increase the uniform division. So the mode is currently set to ray intersect, so it will rebuild this geometry. But you can also see that it does some pretty awful things. The reason it's doing this is because it's not a closed geometry. It's got holes. So you can see, I can see this kind of blue color. That shows me that I'm looking at the inside of the geometry. So it's not a closed, completely enclosed collider. So we could try and fix that. This mouse sounds horrifying. I do have my microphone very close to my mouth, so to try and fix an echo. I don't know if the echo is still happening. I'll move it to the other side. Let me see. Is that better? You're lucky I'm not using my noisy mouse. I switched to something that's slightly quieter. Cool. Thanks, Hamid. Alright, so let's let's try and close this off so that we can use it as a collider. So I'm going to put a polycap down. And I might actually take this out of line now, so I'm not affecting what's going into my vellum cloth. So let's try a polycap. Actually, I don't know if that's important. Let's see. So we'll try a polyfill, and sometimes... Oh, cool. Thanks, Adam, about the echo. That's good to know. So we'll try a polycap. Sometimes that works, but if we scrub and go through, let's see. It's doing some pretty bad stuff up here. So another thing that we could try is doing a... let's see, what do I want to do? Poly-extrude. Like this. So if I go inwards, and you can see it's doing some awful things. I'm going to turn on output back, because that will give me my original front surface. I'm extruding negative, that's why I need the output back to give me my original surface. But you can see it's giving me these awful extrusions, which, yeah, it's terrible. It looks kind of cool, actually. It looks a bit like a moth. But that's not what I want. So you can switch it to point normal, and that can often fix that stuff. It's doing it by this like automatically created primitive edge normal by default. But if you set it to point normal, it will take those point normals that we created early on, and you can fix some of those awful spikes. You can see it's still doing some kind of weird stuff in places, but as a collision object, it might be okay. And we don't actually need to do it that much, just need to do it a little bit. But this should hopefully give us a slightly better collision object. The other thing that we can do, we can try, is attribute blurring those point normals to try and fix that stuff. So attribute blur set to N, and then poly extrude, can sometimes fix some of those extrusion issues as well. So let's have a look at that. And blurring iterations. So you can see it's kind of, I don't know, it's not really fixing it terribly well, but sometimes that can help. This is probably okay. If I go back and have a look at my vellum sim now, go back to the first frame, and look at my collision guide, you can see that those weird lines have at least gone away. And if I increase this to be, hopefully, probably shouldn't have done that so high, so cavalierly, because that can crash. I'm going to save and actually turn on autosave just in case this crashes, because that is a possibility. So, uniform divisions. You can increase that, but you do have to be careful, and it's actually quite slow. So the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a VDB from this. So VDB from polygons. And turn this into a volume. And you can see that gives me quite a good representation. And then I'll put another null down and say out teeth VDB. So VDB is a very efficient way of representing a volume in Houdini. It stands for voxel database, and it's useful for so many things. It's useful for modeling, for creating volumes, clouds, things like that. But it's also really handy for creating collision representations. So if we have a look at this mode, ray intersect, if we change that to volume sample, we can now point that in this proxy volume slot to that VDB that we created, out teeth VDB. And then we get this perfect representation, and it's nice and quick to generate it. So always do that when I have the option. So we've got deforming geometry turned on. I'm going to turn off the collision guide because it's quite slow to display it while you're simulating. And let's see what happens. It's always a good idea to turn on constraints as well, so that you can see that your constraints are actually working. So you can see when I turn that on, I can see those attachment constraints that I had created there. So let's see what happens. And hopefully the cloth will move. It is, which is great. Let's look through the camera. What I'm hoping to see is that we'll get some stretching when he opens his mouth. Fingers crossed. Waiting. Waiting is a big part of doing effects. There we go. Cool. So we got some stringy draw, and it's doing some nice kind of squashing in the center, which is kind of something that you might get. And what I'm thinking is that when he opens his mouth to do this kind of raw, that we get some wind blowing it out and getting it to kind of flop around, and maybe even it tears as well. I think tearing could be cool. We actually have the ability on these constraints here, this attachment constraint, we can actually break these based on a threshold. So let's just turn it on. We won't change any of the settings and see what happens. Another thing to probably note is that we're simulating for a long time before we actually get to the part that is interesting. So I think we could probably start this simulation maybe, slightly. We could even start it at 229. I don't know that we need to start it so early. So let's go actually 230. So on my simulation tab, my shot actually starts at 150 instead of 1. So let's start the sim at 230, and then actually, yeah, I think that'll be alright. No, that's not alright. So I set up my grid at frame 150, but if I start at 230, then it's not actually in line with my mouth. So I would have to realign that, which is a little bit annoying, but I will do it just to save myself some time. So I'll just go back here. Hopefully it won't take me too long to just realign that. The cool thing about the vellum attachment constraint is that it will just attach based on proximity to any geometry, so I don't have to get it in the same position exactly, as long as it's roughly kind of between these teeth or any of these teeth. And the cool thing is that when I want more of these, I can just duplicate them and put them in, a different position, and it should hopefully update. So there we go. That didn't take me too long. So 230, and let's see what we get. Drawn Skull says, I love the effects work in Transformers, Iron Man, and Deadpool. Yes, they are very cool. A lot of those effects, well, not all of them, but a lot of those effects were done by ILM, and various other studios as well. Certainly a lot of the Transformers work and Iron Man was done by ILM, and they are definitely, one of the best studios out there, and have been since the 70s and 80s. There's certainly some very good other studios out there these days, but ILM have always been kind of leading the pack when it comes to VFX, so it's definitely good to watch their work, and they have a lot of really cool breakdown videos on YouTube, which you can check out if you're not familiar with that sort of stuff, and you can see how they kind of put various shots together and the elements that go into certain shots. Okay, cool. So there we go. Look, there's some braking happening. So I've got that attachment constraint, and I turned on that braking threshold, and you can see that it's actually snapping away from the bottom and kind of springing up to the top. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe it's breaking a little soon, so we can go and adjust our threshold. We've got it set to stretch stress. There's a few different ones that you can change, like stretch distance, stretch ratio. Let's just increase the braking threshold and see what happens. There we go. So it doesn't seem to be braking now. It might at some point. No. So maybe we'll drop it down again. And a lot of my mic is echoing again. Well, I don't know what's causing it. I'm sorry. Because I'm not changing anything. Let me just see if I've got anything that could be causing it. I'll just close some stuff. Let's see if that helps. It's fixed. Okay, cool. Yeah, I really don't know. I really don't know what's causing it. So yeah, take that down to 0.25. I think maybe it's just when I talk loudly. I could just turn my mic down maybe. Let's see if that helps. I'll try and work it out for next time. If it continues. All right, so 0.25, we're still getting it. I'm just going to leave that for now, but let's look at what we can do in terms of forces. So I might actually remesh this a little more just to get slightly better resolution out of it. So let's just drop this down. It's better. Great. Thanks, Hamid. So let's just drop this down and let me know, if you want me to explain any of this stuff any better, or, just go through some things a little more. I am going through this pretty quickly, but yeah, if you have any questions about anything that I'm doing, please let me know. All right, so I might take this, now that I've remeshed that, I've got a lot more points, so I can actually change this max distance, and then hopefully that might look a little better. Let's see what this looks like. Whoops. So I really like this kind of effect where it's sort of narrowing in the center. I think that looks really cool, like a stringy kind of bit of draw, which is nice. So let's see if we can get any blowing effect here. So if we have a look at our mouth orientation and looking at my gnomon down here, it's let's see, it's in negative X and positive Z. So it's kind of hard. It's hard when things aren't oriented perfectly down the axes. But this direction is negative X and this direction is positive Z. So that is sort of positive Z with a bit of negative X. So let's try putting in a pop force, and I'll plug it into the middle input, which is particle forces. So I can plug that in, and we've got negative X, let's put 1, and positive Z. Let's see what we get. And I'll just go back to first frame and sim. Might not be strong enough. Okay, so not really seeing a whole lot there. Let's try negative 10 and positive 10. And again, not very much. Let me try breaking one of these constraints. So I'll just take that threshold down to 0.1 again. And this is a big part of working in effects. Is there is quite often a lot of trial and error in your settings. One of the things that might be contributing to this not working too well is just that I don't have a lot of horizontal subdivisions. So I'm possibly not going to get a lot of deformation outwards along the length. I'm getting stretching, but because of the way that I've set this up, from it being very small at the start, when it stretches out, I'm not getting a whole lot of horizontal kind of subdivisions that would allow it to deform. They're all kind of vertical. So that could be a part of it. I'm just, one thing that I do that seems to shock some people when I do it during class is just set the values really, really high to see if anything can get it working, because it doesn't seem like it's doing anything at the moment. I would like to see it break, so I'm just gonna try and take that threshold down, see if I can get it to break, because maybe once it breaks, then we'll see some blowing away. Come on, you can do it. Let's have a look how many constraints we've got down here. We've got quite a few constraints, so I might just try reducing that as well. Yeah, we've got quite a lot of constraints along here, so let's try let's see, turn off use closest constraint, closest location on primitive, then maybe we'll just get a bit less. Don't know. It's all a bit of an experiment at this stage. Okay, let's see what we get. Still not breaking, which is odd. Let's go back to our attach and try changing the threshold. So let's try stretch distance instead and see if that gives us a better breaking. Maybe it'll break sooner. Awesome, still not breaking. Take that threshold right down. So the threshold is basically once it gets over this, then it should break. But it doesn't seem to be, which is weird. It was working before, so I don't really know why it's not now. The one thing that could be happening is that it's actually getting caught in the collision geometry because I haven't been terribly accurate in how I've placed this. I've put it through the geometry. It might actually just be getting stuck. So like, stuck inside the collision and just kind of carried along with the collision. So maybe if I'm slightly more accurate with that and just place it sort of right, almost touching it. Yeah, just like that. Let's see if that makes any difference. We want to check that we're still getting some constraints. So let's just maybe make our distance a little better. There we go. Yeah, that's right. I don't know how to pronounce your call sign, Adam. Chulade? Is that it? Anyway, yes, as you were saying to Drawn Skull, the director oversees, a lot of stuff, a lot of people, and quite often, there are multiple people between the director and, me. Clyde. Oh, right. Wow, I really messed that up. That's hilarious. So, yeah, between the director and like me as an effects artist or effects supervisor or lead, there are so many layers of people giving input and direction. And often that's because the director doesn't know about VFX or doesn't know about what to tell a VFX studio or a VFX artist, how to achieve the thing that he's after. So he will tell the VFX supervisor, there's an on-set VFX supervisor or a client, a director side VFX supervisor. He will tell them what he wants. Oh, there we go. We've got breaking happening. So I think that's what was happening. It was getting stuck inside the teeth. That's something to be aware of. So maybe I'll take my threshold back up and see what effect that has. There we go. So it is breaking, and you can see it's getting blown out. So I think that is the pop force then, just once it's detached, it's just blowing it away. Yeah, there we go. That's kind of cool. So let's set this back to -1 and 1. Yeah, so because the director, usually doesn't have any experience in 3D, they will utilize the VFX supervisor to, convey their vision to all the VFX artists in the studios around the world. So you have a VFX supervisor that works with the director. Then you have a VFX supervisor that is in the studio. So those two VFX supervisors talk together, and the studio side VFX supervisor tries to then interpret what the director's vision is via the client side VFX supervisor, and then pass that on to the artist as direction for what to do. So quite often sometimes that can be very ambiguous what what the direction is. It can just say I don't know, it could just say create drool effect. But they haven't said like how much, what it should be doing. Should it be pouring out of his mouth? Is he drooling like a hungry dog, or is it just like some strings like this? It's kind of that stuff is often not conveyed. Sometimes they just don't know. They just want to see something, or they just want anything in there will be a cool thing to have. So yeah, it can be tricky sometimes when you have very ambiguous direction. But there are a lot of people that work to make a film production, and that's just like, from my knowledge, that's just the VFX side. But then when you go and watch the credits, when I watch credits of movies that I've worked on, I always forget that there's like a whole lot of other people working on the film before I even start working on it, and they're the people that are working on set. There's a whole other world of film production that is different to VFX, which is the on-set stuff, and that takes just as long, if not longer, than the VFX side of things. So it's always something that I kind of forget about. I mean, I'm always aware of it, but it just surprises me how many people do actually do work on films before it even ends up in VFX. Patrick says, how you break the string right in the middle. Yeah, that was what I was thinking as well, Patrick, is that it would be cool if it did break right in the middle. That requires a little more work at the SOP level, so we actually need to break the mesh beforehand. Reza says, how much can an effects artist make? Well, it's variable. It depends. It depends on the country. It depends on the studio. But top VFX artists, you're talking like I think in the film world, you probably be under the $200,000 mark. I'm going by Australian, so I don't know what that would be in other currencies, but yeah, for like your top VFX artists, you'd be maybe, I don't know, above 100,000. Certainly you would be incredibly lucky if you got close to the 200,000 mark, but I'd say sort of as an upper limit around 120 to 150. But it depends. Some places in America you earn more, and some parts around the world you earn less. It's not constant for every country, unfortunately. But that's kind of the upper echelon of where you might get to one day. And then if you're a freelancer, then you can potentially earn a lot more. I mean, I know commercial freelancers can, they can charge upwards of over $1,000 a day. That's also not standard, but you definitely can in certain industries charge a lot more. So yeah, there's definitely potential for a lot of money to be made as an effects artist, but it's not everyone's experience, and those high prices that I gave out are kind of once you've been working in the industry for a very long time, and then even then it depends on the studio. So yeah, we're going to do a breaking in the center. So let's talk about that. Let's put down an edge fracture. I think that's what I want. Edge fracture. So edge fracture is a little bit different to Voronoi fracture, if you're familiar with that, where Voronoi fracture will actually just cut the geometry without a care in the world for the existing points or edges. But edge fracture will fracture along edges that exist and not create new cuts. So if we turn on primitive piece and turn on this little visualizer, we can get a bit of a sense of these cuts that it's generating. So you can see it's just broken up the existing geometry into some parts. So if we take this down, we might be lucky in getting something that works. And maybe that, or maybe that might work. It's, even something like that might be useful. I think that'll be fine. Let's try it. That's the only way to kind of figure it out. Godzilla vs. Kong. Is Godzilla vs. Kong coming out soon? Are they still working on that? What was I going to do? Oh, so now I need to do a vellum weld, I think. Let's try it. can't remember exactly what one this is. Yeah, I think that's the one I need. So you can see there I've got a vellum constraint that's been created where those breaks have been added. So that is going to be the constraint that keeps those together until the point in March, right? Cool. Well, not long. That will be cool. These points will hopefully stay together until the point that we want them to break, and I can control that, but I'll just set it via the breaking threshold. But we can see that even though we have that there now, we should still get that not breaking. You can see it's still stretching. Oh, looks like we've got some bonus stuff in our viewport. Our viewport in Houdini quite often tends to degrade, and we get left with a little legacy thing here that shouldn't be there. It's not bothering me at the moment, but I might create a new viewport soon so that goes away. So you can see that those areas are not breaking currently. Let's just play it through, so we should still get that kind of breaking off effect that we were getting previously. There we go. It's kind of funny. But now let's turn on the break threshold for the weld. So we'll set it a bit lower, 0.01, see what happens. And then we could actually turn off the braking, or just turn up the braking for the attach. Let's turn it off. See what we get. There we go. So now we ended up with two little bits either side. So it's, you know, I think part of why this is ending up in little bits is because of that initial starting shape that I created. So that very small square that we're starting with. So they're trying to kind of return to that size. So that's kind of why I think it's snapping back like that. It's not too bad though. I think that's kind of alright. But there you go. So there's some snapping in the middle, which is kind of cool. You can also, of course, play with the vellum cloth settings. So we haven't really touched those. You can see, you know, we've got these stiffness settings. We've got bend, which is set to like 1 times 0.0001. So very low amount. So we can change these multipliers. We can set it to 1, so it's just 1 to 1. And then we could control that, see what happens. So let's see what that does for our behavior. It might not really affect too much at this stage. We could also play with the... so which one did I change there? This one. We could also play with this stiffness, you know, to change it. I don't think we want this to be super stiff anyway, so I might just set that down to 1. You can also change the rest length scale. So this is always going to try and resolve to its original size. But if you modify the rest length, you can do that a few different ways. But if you modify it, it will actually affect like what shape it resolves to. Yeah, that's the effect you were kind of thinking of, Patrick? So if I change this rest length scale, let's see what happens. It might not work too well, but let's give it a go. So I set it to 2, and you can actually see it kind of expands. So it's got a little bit bigger. It's kind of hard to tell, but I think it's maybe gotten a little bit bigger. You can see it right at the start what happens. So if I step through, see how it expands right at the start now? Because the rest length scale is 2 instead of 1, it actually expands straight away because it's trying to resolve to something that's 2 times bigger. So you can play with that to try and, you know, get some expansion or some growth in your vellum. And you can use this effect to, you know, fake kind of inflation effects and things like that. But I'm hoping that we can use it to maybe just make this look a little bigger than it is. So you can see it there inflating up. Hit play. And once it breaks, you can see we end up with a slightly larger bit flapping around down there. So that's kind of okay. I mean, it's not perfect, but that's all right. Now, I think with this kind of working pretty well, let's go and make some more. So I'm just going to take my grid. yeah, look, making movies is a great way to escape. I think making stories and creating things, creating anything is a great way to escape and create some interesting worlds. I like, the reason I kind of got into film and creating this stuff in 3D is I just like trying to recreate things to be as real. As possible. I find that challenge, really kind of fun. It is a real challenge to make something look very real. And the reason I got into effects is I really liked trying to recreate natural phenomena. So, water and fire, and just trying to make it look as believable and realistic as possible. I found that kind of challenge really, really enticing. And nowadays, with Houdini, it's so much easier than it used to be to create things that look real. The simulations are so much better. The rendering techniques are so much better. Although rendering in Houdini can be painfully slow sometimes, but the quality that you get is really amazing. In the past, it was often quite difficult, and you had to cheat a lot or come up with like really, really tricky kind of workarounds to certain problems. But the good thing about Houdini is it's so flexible that you can kind of just do anything you want, and come up with the technique and come up with the tools that you need. So yeah, I definitely like creating things. I don't know that I would ever try and create my own movie, just because I know how difficult that would be, and I'm probably not as interested in the production side of it as the sort of art side of it. But that's just me. That's just a personal thing. I think coming up with stories and creating stories and worlds is a really fun thing to do, though. All right, so I'm just duplicating this stuff out, and I'm hoping that merging it all back together and running it through the same setup will just produce the same result, but on mass. So let's see. Okay. Cool. So it's a little bit uniform. I might space those out a little bit, and maybe even add some noise. I think the thing that I don't love about it is that it's not kind of wobbling or it's all very uniform. So I'm going to try, so this noise is super strong. I'm going to turn that down for a start. And I'm going to try just adding some noise in here, some amplitude. So if you turn on the guide and zoom out, it creates it at the origin, this guide, but you can see the scale of the noise that you're creating. So that might be all right. Let's just have a look, see what it looks like. And again, because we have those vertical segments, it actually might not work that well, the noise. We got some weird stuff going on here as well. I'm not sure why that there is pinned in space. It looks like it's got one of those constraints to the mouth, but it's actually not breaking, or it's not kind of deforming, which is really odd. So I might just put on this attach, I might turn that breaking back on, just so that any that do stretch too much will break. So yeah, I mean, now that I've got the setup, I can just sort of start placing these things around and playing with that, playing with the settings, trying to get some more interesting breaking and behavior. The vellum part can just be the beginning of this effect. Then I can add, some extra blobs of maybe particles coming off this stuff. Maybe, you know, I can do some flip drool if I want to. I don't know that I would go that far to create a flip for this. It might be a little bit of overkill. But I think just having these kind of strings in there will certainly help. And probably if I just position them maybe a bit more randomly so it's not just the front four teeth doing it, then it might look, you know, a bit more interesting. Can a concept artist tell a story? Yes, absolutely. A concept artist can. Although, you know, they're limited to telling that story in a single image or multiple images. But yeah, absolutely a concept artist can tell a story, you know, just like a painter or any artist can tell a story with their artwork. Quite often then it's because there's a lot that isn't said, it's just a still image. It's often up to the interpreter, the viewer, to try and work out what that story is exactly. In films, certainly in American films, you're often told just about every detail to work out, or so you don't have to work too much out, even the punchlines of jokes, which I find incredibly annoying. But yeah, I think with concept art, when you're just doing a still, then you can leave a lot up to the viewer to imagine or put their own spin on a story, which is actually quite interesting. Yeah, and then obviously, if you're being a concept artist in film, then you're trying to illustrate the main sort of points that need to be sort of achieved, whether it's lighting or whether it's the look or the feeling. Then that's kind of what you might be doing as a concept artist in film. But yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm mostly happy with this. I think I'd like to get a little bit more deformation, sort of bowing this stuff out. I mean, I would say that vellum is not the only way to do this. You could do this in a procedural way as well. I just thought, getting some of this floppy motion might have been cool. What I could do to make this a bit more interesting is also do like some post deformation. So if I put a dop import down and merge this out of the simulation, so here, dop import, I'm just going to drag up my vellum sim to the dop network, fetch geometry, and you can see it's also bringing out my collision object. So I'm just going to go in and I want to grab the vellum source of vellum object. I can't remember which one. Let's see. Vellum object 1. Oh, there we go. Vellum object. So yeah, quite often it is the object that you want to bring out when you're doing the dop import. And fetch geometry from dop network. You can see that's bringing out my points, polygons, primitives, and a whole bunch of attributes that I don't really need. So you can delete those. Attribute delete. You can delete a lot of those things if you want. I don't really need most of that stuff. So I might just delete it. I can always come back and bring it back if I want. So now you can see I've just got P, which is fine. So one thing that I could do here is potentially just add a little bit of noise to this to make it a bit less linear. So turbulent noise, P to pos, add, back to P, and then put the sum into the output. So I'm adding noise to P and then putting that sum back into P. So I need this to be 3D noise, and I need to make sure that I'm viewing it. And there we go. So you can see how that is changing the effect. And it's crazy because my amplitude and my frequency is very large. So if you increase frequency, you're going to get this kind of much higher frequency noise. But I just want it to be kind of subtle. I don't want it to be a crazy amount of noise. Because this is moving through space as well, that noise is going to be changing every time this kind of moves. It is going to flicker around. You can see that when the amplitude is quite high. You can see as it moves through, it jumps around like crazy. So I do have to be careful with it, applying it on animated geometry like this. I could probably create a rest position right at the start, and that could help. but I don't have that. You can also try different noises for different effects. But you can see that that has just, just some very subtle variation has helped me get away from that very linear kind of stuff. Now, to render this, at the moment, probably doesn't look that good. What I'm thinking is I'm going to do is maybe turn it into a VDB, my old friend VDB. If I plug a VDB in there like that, I need to take my voxel size right down, but you can see I don't get a great capture. And the reason is that these are just thin grids, they're just planes. So VDB is like a volume, so it likes to fill a volume. So I could try doing a poly extrude, but I could also do a scatter on these. So a scatter, turning these into points. And then I'm going to turn off relax as well, because that's really slow. And then I could do VDB from particles. So I could mesh this like a fluid. So turn my points into a volume. And I need to take my point radius scale down. And my minimum radius I'll just set to 0. And then you can see I get a much better capture. So I'll keep going down with this. I'll go 0, 0, 5. And I can play with that if I want to. I can increase the amount of points so I get that connection looking a little better. And then I can convert that. So convert VDB back into polygons. There we go. So yeah, that's not too bad. I've got some weird stuff going on here, or little junction happening. It's probably going to split at some point, that little bit there. Well, there we go, it did split. Let's have a look at our original. Yeah, okay, cool. So that was just splitting at that point. One thing that you could do though to get some interesting stuff going on, like maybe some better smoothing, is to, just smooth that stuff out. So VDB smooth, VDB smooth SDF is the one I want. Smooth SDF there. So there are two smooths, VDB smooth and smooth SDF. Smooth works on if this was a density as well. So you're creating like a kind of fog volume, but because we're using a distance VDB, a surface field, we can use this SDF version. And this actually has some nice different types of smoothing operations like laplation and mean curvature, which apply smoothing without completely removing all of the voxels and kind of eroding the volume. You can see when I have this at the Gaussian, it's sort of, it's very aggressive smooth and it removes a lot of stuff. So even mean value can as well if you have that right up. So laplation flow, you can see, sort of preserves most of that volume, but it does a pretty good job of smoothing. So if I convert that now, I get, just a little bit more interesting result. And there's some cool stuff going on here. I like that, where that variation in thickness is really nice. So you can see now it's starting to look a bit better, and it will, it will actually shade better because it's now no longer a really thin surface. It has some depth to it. So when I shade this as a liquid or something, it will refract. Hamid, yes, that's a very good point. I don't have gravity on this stuff yet, so perhaps that that will, help as well. Maybe that will. Let's turn it on and see what happens when we turn gravity on. Hopefully it doesn't all just fall out of his mouth. Let's try this. Got about half an hour left, so I'll try and finish this one off, and then next week we can work on something else. It's really weird that it doesn't pull this stuff down in the center, but I think, like I said originally, I think it's just because there are so few horizontal subdivisions by the time this is at like full stretch that it can't really deform in the center, which is a bit of a shame. If I really wanted that, maybe I would go back to changing the frame that I set this up on. Instead of setting it up on frame 230, maybe I would set the length like here and work backwards. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly, but anyway, we've got gravity on, and now that's kind of hopefully at least pulling that stuff down when it breaks off. Okay, so what are we going to do? Let's have a look at our final result. And you can see, you know, when I look through the camera and look at the plate, we've got this kind of effect, which is, yeah, it's kind of cool. The snapping is working pretty well. The 4 teeth in a row does not look good. So let's just change that. So we'll go back to our original frame. And just template that. And let's just work on, you know, maybe this, which one is which? This really large one, maybe we can get rid of that and put it, whoops, put it over, you know, over here somewhere. And, you know, we don't have to do it between the teeth either. I mean, there's, you know, there's no reason why we can't put it kind of inside the mouth. We also have, you know, the tongue that we could use in there as well. So we could have that in there like that. Let's see what that ends up looking like. There we go. It's kind of cool to have a nice thick one as well. So you get more of that nice kind of stretching and shrinking effect in the center, which is kind of cool. So that's looking good. So let's try another one of those just to finish that off, and then maybe I'll just have a quick look at rendering or something. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like me to kind of talk about with this stuff, or anything else? There's that big one. I'll just clone that. So I might put another one over this side here. Oops. And these ones, you know, we had a bit of an issue before with the teeth where it was going through the teeth and it wasn't breaking off. But with these ones, I'm not worrying about that so much. It's kind of okay if they're just stuck inside. Let's see what that looks like. So that's the cool thing with this setup, is I can just keep adding these, merging them together. The weld dynamically generates based on those cuts, and the attach dynamically generates based on that proximity. So I can add as many of those as I like around the place, and it will, you know, it will all just dynamically update, which is cool. Oh, there we go. Look at that one. That one's bowing. That's cool. That's what I was hoping to see. So it seems like maybe the bigger ones will give me a bit more of that, because you can see this one has much more horizontal subdivisions. Maybe even changing the remesh resolution might help, but that's cool. It's nice to see. Let's take a look at that through the camera. Go out and look at our convert. Yeah, you can see that noise is a little strong as well, that flickering noise. So might, yeah, could probably lose that, or maybe just maybe the frequency is too high. So I might just take that frequency down. So lower number means bigger noise. So maybe that might look a little bit better. And, you know, this is going to be pretty subtle. At the moment, it's pretty full on. You can see it very brightly inside his mouth. But let's have a quick look at rendering. See if I can get something rendering in 20 minutes. So that's our final effect. Let's now set up a shader. I'm going to set this up in Mantra. I do have Redshift, but not in this version of Houdini. I might do a Redshift stream at another time, converting this over. So let's call this draw. And I'm also, while I'm in here, I'm going to create a constant shader. So I usually just use this gallery one under utility, constant. And I'm going to put on that the plate. So I'm going to go back to my Kong asset, grab this UV quick shade. And I'm going to turn the UV quick shade off now, because that actually, it's not a material, it's just helpful for visualization. I'm going to put on that constant under surface, color map, paste that in there, and then I'll apply this constant shader to Kong, so that now he has this shader on him, and that will work for my background and any refractions. So the draw, I can drag, hopefully try and get it on there, there we go. So dragging on from the material palette onto the viewport just puts it into this render slot here. So you can see those two have their renders. I don't have any lights, so I'm just gonna put an environment light down, and I'm just gonna use one of these ones as a temporary, maybe this one, this noon one, or yeah, let's just try that, just as a temporary light. And then I might try and set up a lighting environment for this. So we've got our environment light, we've got our draw. Let's hit the out context and create a mantra node. And I've got my cam. So I need to pick the correct camera. This is just the default. So I need to pick that camera there, camera 1. And rendering, I'm gonna, no, I don't need to worry about that. Objects. So here, under forced objects, I'm just gonna put draw. And under force matte, I'm going to put Kong. This is going to be a very small render, so it will render quite quickly because there's not a lot to it. I'm going to set the render engine to PBR, and limits, I'll just set that to like 3 and 3. And yeah, there we go. So let's render it and see what happens. Render to, I'll just use the render view, hit save. Turn off progressive and hit render. Let's see what we get. Take a little while to load it in, but once it gets going, it should just render very quickly. We do have our background in here as well. So there it is. There's our draw. Let's go to our material and set transparency to 1. And base color shouldn't really be making any effect when that is set to 1. Reflectivity is set to 1 as well, so that is reflecting. But you can see, I'll turn off reflection for a second. You can see I'm actually getting refractions of the Kong's mouth. So that's important when you want this to integrate properly into a character. So at the moment, you can see I've actually got black where the Kong matte is. So if I hide that, force matte, you will see that it fits in the mouth, and I can see the back plate, but it's actually not refracting the mouth now. So I'll put that back in, and what I can do instead, so this is coming from the camera, so I'm going to turn that off on the camera. There we go. So now we've just got our draw render, and that's what we would want for compositing. We just want that without anything else. But so that I can visualize this in here, I can hit D in the render display and go to background and load in that image. So I'm just going to go and copy that path and put it into the background image. Hit apply, and now you can see that my background image is there, that holdout issue is gone, and there's my draw. It's very hard to see because it blends in pretty well because it's perfectly refractive, but it no longer, stands out like being something that's too over the top. It's now nice and kind of embedded. Now let's go back to our material, and we can play with these things. So we can turn up reflection. Then you can see I get a bit of highlight, and that actually looks a little better, a little bit more realistic. I could play with transparency, turning it down. So if I lower my transparency, it's going to introduce more diffuse. So you can see if I change this color, you get diffuse color. So when you have a lower than 1 transparency, it's going to introduce more diffuse. So sometimes when I want a kind of whitish refraction, I will just turn down my transparency and allow some of that base color to come in. And that gives me a slightly more opaque, less transparent refractive object. The other thing you can do is increase roughness, and that can sort of make the refraction rougher, but I find that that doesn't always give me the result that I'm after. So, you know, maybe a combination of roughness and a little bit less transparency to get that kind of white. And that kind of looks, you know, not too bad. And we can just step through this and hopefully it'll update. There we go. Yeah, maybe it's a little bright. These are things that we can fix in comp as well. You know, maybe this stuff is a little thick, so we might want to just thin that down, which really wouldn't be too difficult. What we could do here is we could try just taking our point radius scale down, so we could drop that by half maybe. There we go. So there'll probably be a point where, you know, it's too small. And we might need to increase our voxel, or decrease our voxel size, increase our volume resolution to capture more detail. So you take that down, and then take this down, and then we might get really fine strands. Yeah, the other option is to render this as like lines, so that you get perfectly very thin, like pixel thin lines. It's another thing you could do if you wanted really, really thin strands and you didn't want to deal with voxel resolutions. But that, yeah, that is not a bad kind of way to control it with the point radius scale. So yeah, that's not too bad. I think you know, we could play with the environment light, the lighting could be increased to get it slightly brighter, or if we want it to be darker, we could drop that down as well. So I think that, you know, is not too bad. It's kind of some nice variation in thickness. This plate is kind of weirdly compressed, so it's got a bit of artifacting going on, but I think that's, you know, that's a pretty good addition. So I'll probably make maybe a few tweaks to this, maybe try and get some more dangly stuff going on. Then in next week's stream we can continue working on, you know, adding more effects to this, so maybe some breath and kind of environment interaction, dust, leaves, things like that. We can probably do all those things pretty quickly. Maybe starting with a pyro sim to drive everything, and then using the pyro simulation's velocities to affect particles, and maybe some different rendering scenarios. And then we could also potentially use those velocities to affect these pyro sims, although sometimes that's a bit overkill, and we could just do it by pulsing a velocity field or something, or a force. Patrick, how you add viscosity on the drill? Well, you're talking about like stuff dripping off. Because this is a vellum sim, you know, you don't really have that that control for viscosity. But if you're talking about things kind of, you know, dripping off, then I guess that would probably then have to be a flip simulation. You could potentially try using the pop fluid, and that might be something that we could look at, is using the pop fluid tool. The pop fluid can be really, you know, good for super blobby, very viscous, or very kind of surface tensiony type things, like what Drool is. So you could potentially do that. One thing that may be difficult is just the animation. Quite often with simulations like Flip or Pyro, when you're emitting something over time and the object is animating, one of the challenges is actually just getting it to kind of behave properly instead of flying out everywhere. But we could, you know, we could try maybe starting the flip simulation kind of here or something, so that it's not moving that far. Instead of starting it from all the way back here, we might get some stuff flying out. I think, you know, what I would do for that is very similar kind of setup. I would need my collision geometry. So I would need probably my whole mouth geometry, or I could just use the whole Kong, convert him to a VDB. So we can, we can start looking at that. Flip, draw, object merge, start again, dot dot slash, Kong asset, out Kong. So we could just do like a VDB from polygons on him, which is a little bit overkill. I mean, you might want to just, chop him off at the neck or something. Quite often what I'll do with characters is, if I just isolate the body and then chop off, like select a ring like that. So I'm hitting Shift A and middle clicking to select that loop. And then if I hit delete and then double click the head and hit delete, I've got a nice capture of the head, and then I could polycap that. And that will give me, so that's, I think the eyes were kind of already filled maybe, but it's filled the neck for me. So when I do a VDB from polygons on that, it gives me a nice kind of result. So that's probably what you should do rather than doing the entire character, because it's pretty inefficient to fill an entire character with a VDB if you're only doing the head. And so let's take the opposite. So I'll copy that, delete non-selected, grab, I'll just turn all that, maybe merge all that in as well. Let's see, if I merge it in before the polyfill, VDB, there's some dodgy stuff going on up here, but I'm kind of only concerned with this section, so I'm not really worried too much about that. I think that'll be fine. So there's a good collision shape for our flip sim. Now we just need to kind of work on, maybe a source, so we could isolate again. Maybe we could use the tongue as the source. We could just take two sides here like that, blast those off, delete non-selected. Oops, have that over to the side, poly extrude. I'm just going to extrude these out a little bit, turn on output back, and then do a points from volume. And fill that with points. Start kind of low, then do null and say out source. And then I'm going to copy this null over here and say out collision geo. Duplicate that again, out collision VDB. Probably all the way up here, I'm going to put down a trail node to calculate velocity now that we're dealing with fluid simulations. The collision object's probably handy to have, set that to compute velocity. It's probably handy to have velocity on there so that when the fluid hits the collision object, it knows kind of how to move. Also, for the emitter, we can attribute transfer that velocity back onto the points. So from above, we can transfer that velocity attribute. And then the points will inherit that motion as they're moving through space. They will inherit that motion of the mouth moving. That hopefully will, help. So let's set up a very quick flip sim. I'm going to start this at 230 again, maybe. Flip solver. Flip object. It's very easy to get going in flip. I mean, all you really need is points and, well, a collision object if you want collision. So you need flip object, flip solver, and a volume source. And the volume source is going to be out source, so that's sop ... out source. Source flip. And then by default it creates this particles group, which I don't have because I created that from points from volume. So I'll just get rid of that, and then I should see my points. There they are, giant balls. Static object, merge. This is all very similar, once you learn how to do a simulation in one kind of simulation type, they're all very similar. So there's our collision geo, used to forming collisions, volume sample, collision VDB. check the collision guide. Yep, that looks good. It's kind of cool, looks very wrinkly. And let's see what we get. So I'm just going to hide this. I'm going to take my particle separation down. So that's my resolution. I'm going to match it to this one, so 0.025. You can see the size of those balls comes down. I also don't like this sprite display, so I'll turn that off so it's particles so I can see the actual points. Hit play, and let's see what happens. So you can see, you know, this is kind of what I was talking about, simulating flip with moving objects. It goes everywhere, so it can be kind of hard to control. But let's have a look. So we got some crazy splashy stuff. Oh, the bounds. There's another thing here as well. The bounds are really big, so I'm going to bring those in. But also, the flip object by default has a SOP path for default fluid, which is creating this cube in the center. I'm going to get rid of that. There you go, it's gone. And if I select my flip solver and hit enter if I don't see this box, I can take this bounds down. It's not crucial to resize this bounds, but it does help kind of, in case anything flies off really far, it does just help keep it kind of nice and tight and kills those things that might fly away. So we also don't have gravity, so let's put a gravity node down. And we could put a drag down as well. But let's just see what happens. So, blah, gross. That's a lot of draw. So you know, but it's pretty cool. It's working. It's interesting. Yeah, it's super gross. It's having a bad day. So let's add viscosity because that will certainly help. We'll turn on enable viscosity. I'll go to my flip object and I will set my viscosity value to be quite high. Let's go 100. We have slip-on collision as well, which we can turn on to make it slide over the colliders a little better. But let's just see what kind of happens with that being slightly higher. So we can see we don't get quite as much splashy behavior when it's viscous. You can see I get a lot of stuff sticking to the inside of the mouth as well, which is kind of cool. And that could actually be quite good. This stuff flying out's not so desirable, but it's definitely, this part is actually kind of working not too bad. So we do have velocity on our source, which we transfer. So we can't control velocity through here by default, but we can just turn that down here. So I'm transferring that velocity attribute. What I could do is just in a wrangle node, I'm just going to multiply that down. So I'll say v at v, which is the velocity, times equals 0.25. So multiplying it down by a quarter. Let's see. I'm almost out of time, but I think, I can continue working on this next week, or I might make a few little changes and render it out and see, kind of what it looks like, so we can move on to a different effect. But you can see this is producing some interesting kind of results, and I could potentially kill that stuff as a post effect. So the next stream is next week, same time, Hamid. For me, it's every Monday morning at 10 a.m. So whatever that is. I think it's 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, US, but yeah, same time every week. So, there you go. I mean, that's the start of an interesting kind of flip sim happening. Very basic, didn't take very long to set up, and same deal with the meshing of this. Put a DOP import down, DOP import fields for flip. Choose the DOP network, so I'll drag that up. And DOP node / flip object. Yeah, nice talking to you too, Drawn Skull. Thanks for all your questions, and happy to talk to you more about that stuff if you want. You can get in contact with me through CG Spectrum, or, you know, feel free to come back next week and we can continue talking about it. But, you know, it's working in film is definitely an interesting career choice. So, you know, feel free to, or not feel free, but yeah, keep pursuing it. I think you know, it's a really good industry and a very good medium for creation. So just pursue your dreams of creation. No worries, Audrey. Thanks for stopping by. I'm just going to very quickly turn this into a VDB particles the exact same way that I did the vellum stuff, and hopefully we'll see something. Although, let's see, points VDB from particles. Maybe I'll just use a particle fluid surface. I'm not sure why that's not working. There we go. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for stopping by. Hope to see you again now that our classes have finished. So there we go. Yeah, there's a nice fluid. So it's probably a bit too splashy and a bit too much, but I think yeah, that combined with the stringy stuff that we've got going on could be an interesting effect. Definitely want to tone it down, the flip stuff, but together those things might actually work pretty well together. So good question, Patrick, that pushed me into another area. But you can see it didn't, you know, did that in like 20 minutes. So flip doesn't have to take a long time to set up, and it can add some interesting dynamic effects to your shot. Cool. All right, guys. Well, I will leave it there, and I might render this out, and we can take a look at that result next week. Potentially start throwing it into Nuke as well, and seeing what we kind of come up with. And I'll see you guys next week if you want to join. Thanks for joining. I'll see you again soon. Cheers, guys. See you later. Thanks, Hamid. See you next time.